Should we get started, Sam? I know it's in a different location from
Yep.
earlier.
And just a reminder that there is a document attached to this meeting. Please go ahead and sign in. Today's office hour session is a bit special. We have Eric, who is a build kit maintainer, who has happily agreed to answer our questions and figure out like how and if we can integrate build kit with the build packs project, including some of the newer capabilities like the merge op support and access to OCI manifest descriptors. So I'll just give a couple of minutes for people to sign in, and then we can get started with the agenda. Maybe it'll be nice for like one of the platform or implementation maintainers to talk about how like we currently use the Docker daemon and what limitations we're facing, and why at some point in the last few months we've been trying to phase out Docker daemon support, and like what we were hoping to get out of these new announcements that were made as part of the new Docker desktop and build kit release.
I can throw a little bit of flavor here from what I recall. So I think for the longest time that I've been around, there's been a performance issue with the Docker daemon when we load images into the Docker daemon. We have sort of like this little workaround in a library called ImageUtil that tries to remedy some of those aspects of it, but nonetheless, it's still a lot slower than a lot of the other sort of solutions out there, like uploading them to a registry. That being said, we did have a POC for sort of like a build kit front end that we wanted to do, and we kind of ran into very similar, we ran into different challenges that kind of made it a little bit more viable for us to think about, instead of supporting, just the registry in the daemon, actually adding OCI support, right? So file system support. And so now that kind of took us down this path of going down that route. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we've left off, is like now we're thinking like, hey, do we even need the Docker daemon, or do we want to just give that sort of responsibility to the platforms? Obviously, Pack would still want to put it into a daemon, but then a lot of other platforms probably don't necessarily care about the daemon itself. That's, again, as far as what I'm aware of. I don't know if anybody else wants to add something there.
Yeah. Eric, I'm not sure how aware you are of the build packs project or like how it works, but if you need any more context, just let us know and we can like give you a brief introduction of what we do, how we use the daemon versus the registry, and so on.
Yeah, no, I've been looking into it a little bit, but yeah, not enough time to absorb all of it. So I saw that like with the Docker daemon, it was primarily used for like local debugging. Is that true, or is there other use cases for it? Like, yeah, I guess what is the use for the Docker daemon like right now?
I'd say there's like two different uses. So like we have to run our builds somewhere in a container. So if you're using the Pack platform, which is like a local CLI platform, it uses the Docker daemon to run those build containers. Whereas if you're using like a Kubernetes-based platform, it's going to use Kubernetes. But then the second place where we use the daemon is sort of what I would call like an export target. So we can either, like write an image directly into a registry, or we can load the image into the daemon. And a lot of Pack users want that latter use case, because what they're doing is they're deving something and then they want to run it and test something out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
And if you have questions about sort of areas where we've run into performance problems or the hacks we've put around it, I'm happy to answer those, but I'm guessing you might be familiar with some of them.
I can guess what they are, but yeah, actually, if you just want to tell me, like what are the performance issues, that would be helpful.
I would say the number one issue is sort of when you're doing a load or a pull into the daemon, that it's figuring out whether it's seen a layer before based on the chain ID. So as soon as you insert one layer it's never seen before, you have to reprovide all the layers. And that's a big problem for us when we're using the daemon as an export target, to the extent that we've sort of like recreated a cache of layers in a volume in order to paper over some of that, so we don't have to pull it back out of the daemon in order to put it in again. And then also we've discovered some undocumented features of that interface where, at least in pull, I think it's clear that you don't need a layer until you hit a new chain ID, but in load that is also true, but undocumented. We figured out we can put in sort of like empty layers up into a certain point. So we spend a lot of time calculating what we can get away with, cheating the daemon out of, and then where we can find quicker places to provide it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that is exactly what I would guess. That's, I think, most people's issue eventually, is that, you could have the exact same layer, like it by itself is, identical, but if other different layers are below it than an image before, then it doesn't care and it'll pull it again.
I assume it's just a legacy of like the Docker V1 image, right? Where it was modeled as a series of diffs rather than independent layers.
Yeah. Actually, I just finished up a contract at Netflix and they had the exact same issue. And they now, the person who originally did that, they are very aware of this issue and they regret their decision every day. It's just, hindsight is being 2020, obviously. But yeah.
In the past, I feel like we've said like, why don't we just go fix it? And then we looked at it and we're like, actually, that's a ton of work.
The general approach that I've heard is actually having Docker switch to using the containerd storage model as a backend. And that's a very big change. So
yeah.
Cool. That makes sense.
And then our second big problem, I guess, is just dealing with artifacts, OCI artifacts other than images. Like there's lots of places where we maybe want to be putting we want like an image manifest, for example, but sort of in the way the registry does it. So we can have as an output of our build annotations on a manifest. Doing that when the export target is the daemon is awkward to impossible. And then we would also like to expand into other types of OCR artifacts, for storing SBOMs, stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've never even tried to do that with the Docker daemon, but that makes sense too. Cool. I guess in general, I've looked a little bit at the overall architecture of build pack stuff, but I'll probably need a lot of help along the way, but we can start getting into questions if we're ready. Done waiting for people.
Do you also want to give an overview of the recent changes that were introduced in BuildKit that sparked off this discussion, and we can then carry on with the series of questions that we have on the doc?
Yeah, totally. I guess maybe just a very brief background on BuildKit. So BuildKit's whole idea is to be kind of like the base layer for higher level build tools, and takes care of a lot of the problems around build execution, caching, exporting results, and all that stuff. And the interface to it is LLB. Sorry if anyone's already familiar with this. I'll just try to go as quickly as possible. It's something called LLB, which is basically just like a DAG of file system operations. And so the idea is that higher level build tools or formats can compile to LLB, which then BuildKit will actually run. And so LLB has different types of operations. There's ones for importing images. There's ones for running a command on top of another file system created by a different LLB op. Those are probably the most common ones. So merge and diff, that's what I just got done adding to BuildKit. Those are two new types of LLB operations. Merge is the main one. Diff is a little bit more obscure, but can be helpful sometimes. But the idea behind merge is that you very often need to take a bunch of different file systems and combine them together into one. So like if you have a bunch of dependencies you need to combine together in order to run a build on top, you need to do that. If you are, you want to export an image that consists of 3 independent components in the final image, you need to merge all of those together. And so before merge op, the only way to do that was something called copy op. So, I mean, in Docker file land, that would literally just be like a copy line. So, like a multi-stage Docker file. Actually, I can share my screen. It might make this a little bit easier to follow. If I can remember how to do that, I will. Oh, it's the big green button. Can you see my screen? No? Cool. This is a blog post. I was hoping it would actually be released by now, but it's still waiting for some approval. But you can get a sneak preview, I guess. Yeah, so like in a Docker file, you have like something like this where you want to build a bunch of stuff independently, and then at the end, combine that all together and use copies. And so that's the Docker file. This is what it looks like in terms of LLB. And you can see here that you are chaining together copy operations. And that, I mean, you're probably familiar with this issue. So I'll skip a lot of the details here, but that can be bad because it creates dependencies between things that don't have dependencies between each other. So like here, this is like the final image where you're trying to assemble all the different parts together. And so like what I'm trying to show here is that there's a cache invalidation of one thing, of this bar component. And so that's fine. It gets invalidated in the final image, and that's fine. But then because of this chain of operations, there's other parts which are not invalidated at all. So this foo part, it should be totally cached. That gets invalidated just because there's this chain of copy operations. I think, yeah, I'm sure all of you have run into this. So yeah, merge is just a new type of operation that lets you just combine things together, but without actually creating dependencies between them. So like here, I'm merging together some base image with 2 copy op results. And so then when you do it this way, skip a lot of details here. Basically, you end up in a situation where you only are invalidating exactly what needs to be invalidated. So that's kind of the base idea here. The other really important aspect of merge op that I think is probably relevant to build packs is that it's implemented lazily, which means that it's only going to be created on disk locally if it actually needs to be. Like, so an example where it need to be is if you're going to do an exec op on top of it, because you need to run a command on top of the merged file system, so it has to exist locally. But if you were to just export the result of a merge op as a container image, there's no need for it to be created on the disk. What you can do is you just take each of the inputs, you just make layers for those, and then you just make the OCI manifest, the image manifest is just those layers combined together. You never had to do any work to actually combine everything on disk locally. So that's important. And then that's really powerful in combination with the fact that BuildKit also implements image references lazily. I don't know if I have. Yeah, I guess it's sort of an example here or down here. Let me make this bigger. So this is a source op where it's basically pulling down an image. These are also lazy. So you can only pull the image if it actually needs to be in existence locally. But like for this LLB here, all of this is lazy and the merge op is lazy. So the entire thing, these could all just exist in a remote registry, and you could export it as an image, and nothing will ever need to be pulled down locally. Or if one part needs to be pulled down locally, then to be like pushed to another registry or something like that, it'll only pull down what it actually needs. So that's like how the new copy -- link flag works, the rebasing. That basically this is the base underneath all of that. Yeah, I think that's like the gist of merge op. There's also diff op, which I can go into too, but I don't know. Does this make sense? Are there any questions about this?
Yeah, I think the cache invalidation parts are not not especially useful for us because we have, like more logic around invalidating caches, but that lazy merge operation is exactly what we're missing from the daemon right now, that kind of makes it less suitable for part of the caching mechanism we have, where if we know that something in the destination image is already there and is good, right? And destination registry really is already there and is good, then we can just say, nope, that continues to be part of the image. My kind of backing up a little bit, thinking about what we're developing right now in the project, I worry a little bit that we're kind of forced to maintain two implementations, right? Like we have this kind of Conoco-like, right, implementation that relies on not needing nested containers. The base image being, the images, we have a build image and a run image. They present the same ABI, so we can build layers in the build image, and they can end up on the run image, and the layers are kind of contractually separated as directories. I worry a little bit about, I don't necessarily think this is a terrible outcome, but I worry a little bit about, we're going to maintain this lifecycle implementation that works like Conoco, that means absolutely no privileges. It's like very efficient, right? And that, you don't have to move bits anywhere where they don't need to go. And BuildKit, I think, is maybe a little more designed to replace a local Docker daemon where you're not running in a container already, right? I think that the destination here is probably we just do both, and it's great. But I'm not very worried about it. I'm just, before we go down that path, I thought I'd ask, are there more ways we could share more between those two implementations, right? Or is BuildKit, very much about an external orchestrator of a container build using containers, right?
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. And right now, that is absolutely the focus of BuildKit, is to be, like a server component, basically, that clients talk to. It sounds like you would almost be more interested in like BuildKit as a library. So like you can get a lot of this functionality. Yeah. And it's technically possible to do that, but it's not fleshed out or like officially supported. I mean, all the BuildKit code is publicly available and you can import it, but there's no guarantees about stability or anything like that. And right now, I guess you do have to run everything in a container. I mean, there's options there. You can use run C or containerd or any OCI runtime. That is an interface which you can add more implementations to. I think you would, at least right now, it's always assumed there's a truth, so right. Whether you consider the container or not, it's up to debate. But yeah, either way, I wouldn't say it's impossible in the future to have something more like what you're describing. Like there's actually probably a lot of use cases that would benefit from it, but right now it's really not. It's a server and it's being optimized for having lots of different clients running lots of different builds in parallel, as opposed to like a standalone thing.
Got it. That's helpful. Yeah. I think part of that use case is, we're aiming to build on large, or to like enable builds on large multi-tenant platforms with untrusted containers, right? No truth, no, like really no nothing, right? At that point. Yeah. So that's kind of where it comes from. I see Jason, you have a...
Yeah, Conoco actually uses all of BuildKit's, especially Dockerfile parsing code and everything, and then instead of invoking containers to do stuff, does its own crazy thing. So
right.
It's interesting. You were mentioning having a BuildKit that instead of calling run C or containerd, did something else that didn't happen to require privilege. Is anybody even looking into that? Because I feel like that would allow me to delete all of Conoco, which I would be more than happy to do.
It depends on what you mean. I'm very much thinking out loud here, so take all of this with plenty of salt. I mean, right now it's really, even in the user-facing API, assume that you could run a command like one of these execops, and that will be such that the rootfs is the file system that it as its input, and at that point you do need at least the truth. So when you say without privileges, I mean, my original interest with BuildKit was just this kind of hobby project I was working on called Bin Castle, which does a lot of things, but among other things, it was a static binary that embedded BuildKit, and it also embedded libcontainer from runc. So it was a completely standalone binary that could just do everything with no external dependencies. And I ran that completely. You didn't even need any set UID binaries to set up the UID mapping or anything like that. I mean, that works. There's it was a total hack, you know, it's kind of a fun thing. So like I would say it's, depending on what you mean by no privileges, possible, but yeah, you need it does assume that, you know, you're going to be able to isolate a process into some rootfs, I suppose. I don't know if that answers your question.
It helps. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it's nice that it sounds like the build kit layers don't assume more than that about what they are doing. They expect to run in some truth, but no, nothing more specific than that.
Right. And they also only go into the container when they have to, like for the exec op. So there's also like a Vertex type called file op, where you can like create file here, delete file here, you know, make whatever. Those you never need to go into a container at all, because they're just, you know, syscalls that just get made directly by the daemon.
Yeah.
Same with merge op too. So it is only when strictly necessary. Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, it seems like we could use merge op to solve our performance problems as is, at least, because like we don't need BuildKit to build layers for us. We have a base image and we have layers that we've built in our own way. All we want to do is merge them together.
Yeah. Yeah. So merge op right now, I guess it was designed with like the registry case, like the case where you're pulling and exporting to a registry. That was the main use case. So I guess I would be more interested in like the details of how you think you would use it, because I just want to make sure that it'll fit.
I think we were hoping that it would solve the daemon case for us, because there's no problem to solve on the registry right now. Like we just upload any blobs that are missing, and then upload a config, and then upload a manifest, and we're done. We've made our image. We don't have to merge anything. The problem is that we wish the daemon was basically just a registry locally, that was the interface for creating images.
Yeah. So when you say daemon, I guess I saw a little bit of this in the notes too, but like if you're using BuildKit and you still want to export to Docker so that like users could, you know, see, if you created an image using merge op and then you want to load that up into Docker, as of right now, you're going to have the same issues actually, because like the way that this will work with Docker is that basically like BuildKit will be its own standalone thing, and it's going to actually be running in a container managed by Docker. And then if you want to go and put it into Docker, it's basically just behind the curtains, putting it into a tar and then loading it into Docker daemon.
Okay, so that's basically what we're doing already. So yeah.
Yeah. There's, well, one other thing is I don't work for Docker, and I really only work on standalone BuildKit. I know a little bit about this just because I've interacted with like the places where BuildKit, you know, touches Docker, but like, yeah, so I'm going to be careful to not, you know, start talking about things I don't actually know, but yeah, like I know that part for sure. That, yeah, you're going to currently have the same issues.
Maybe I was like misunderstanding this. I was hoping that we would come out of this sort of with new APIs to the daemon that we could use to merge images together.
Yeah, right now no, I don't think that's going to quite work. So I mean, like, if you wanted to just ignore Docker entirely, then you know you can do all of this in BuildKit and it will work. You know, it'll work within the context of BuildKit itself, but BuildKit will just be, you know, a container that's running under Docker, the Docker daemon, and it has its own storage volume. But yeah, if you want to then just do Docker run, that's not going to work yet. There's other approaches entirely. Like you could, you know, if you swapped out Docker for containerd and then you run BuildKit, so BuildKit can use containerd as like one of its backends, then you could actually get probably the same interface. So there's project from Akihiro Suda to make basically a Docker compatible CLI for Containerd. So I guess like that would maybe be an option. I don't know. That's just kind of a random idea.
I think the primary use case for what we're interested in BuildKit for is, we kind of have two use cases for build packs, right? One is cloud platforms that are going to build using unprivileged lifecycle. BuildKit is maybe less suitable for that right now, kind of based on what we talked about earlier. And then there's local builds. There's like, you're going to pack build on your local machine. And we could, like even there are options where we keep Docker, but we invent our own storage locally. Like we run a local registry, and you could do pack list and see something different than you see, with Docker, the Docker images command. But I think that a user's expectation is that if they're running Docker for desktop or whatever it is locally, right? They could do pack build, and then they see Docker images and they Docker push. And even though we have a publish flag that runs the cloud, like version of that, that's more efficient, that doesn't have to deal with loading and saving into the Docker daemon, most people don't really want to. They want to use the tool like they use Docker in a lot of cases, right? And that's kind of what we're running into. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you don't want to ask your users to go install Containerd now or something like that. Like the big benefit is that everyone has Docker already.
Exactly.
Like I wish there was a Containerd desktop and that was the thing everyone was using, but we need to meet users where they're at, right? We're trying to make a build pack platform that works with the container solution that they already have. Yeah,
no, that makes total sense. And I mean, I can think of happy things like running Containerd inside a Docker container, but I don't know if you really want to go down that path, but I am technically possible.
I mean, we could run a registry locally, right? And then Docker is a fine container orchestration engine. We don't need container. It doesn't matter if it's Docker Containerd that's just going to run the containers. So we could run our cloud thing and export to a local registry and then build a whole interface around managing things in that local registry. And that we wouldn't even need Containerd in that case. So it would work great. But before we do that, we wanted to explore, see if BuildKit would solve the problem for us.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right now, it doesn't sound like it would totally. And it's like I said, I mean, I don't have a ton of insight into Docker's roadmap or anything like that. I do know that they are aware of these issues you're talking about. So, it's definitely worth seeing, like if they're putting any priority on them. Like in theory, if Docker, the actual daemon, switched to like the Containerd storage backend, then that would probably make this integration a lot easier, and all those problems would go away. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Someday.
Yeah, maybe.
So right now, when like Docker desktop actually uses BuildKit, so it has to go through the same cycle. When people run Docker build on newer versions of Docker desktop, they're calling out to BuildKit. BuildKit is doing the whole thing, and then it's calling Docker load at the end to load the tarball.
Yeah, so actually I saw questions about this, so I took 5 minutes and made the ugliest diagram I've ever made to try to explain this, because it's a little complicated. Okay, so there's the default Docker build, which is actually, I think, being deprecated in the next version. And now the next version of Docker, it's switching over to always using BuildKit, at least by default. But so there's a driver, there's a concept of drivers for that. And the one you get if you do nothing is the Docker driver. So like this is right now, if you do Docker build X build or whatever, this is the default. And so that actually, it talks to something that is embedded in Dockerd. So it's using BuildKit as a library. And I have here BuildKit-ish because it's a very, it's taking little components of BuildKit and combining them together in a way that adapts it to Docker's storage model, the one with all the problems we were just talking about. And so that one actually, it actually merge all, it technically works, but it doesn't have all the same benefits. Like it doesn't have the lazy behavior, for example. So that's what you get by default. But if you switch to the Docker container driver as the backend, it's just like one command to do that, then you will be, what happens is Dockerd starts up BuildKit in a container, which is great because you can update BuildKit completely independently of Docker and all of that. And then you get all the benefits of BuildKit. It's basically, you end up with pretty much all the benefits of standalone BuildKit, except you can do it, through the Docker CLI interface. And so, yeah, I lost my train of thought of what the original question was, but somehow this was addressing it.
So when you're doing it in this mode, where does it put the end result? It's looking in this picture like it ends up, like, is it writing like an OCI layout into a volume or?
So yeah, BuildKit it has its own volume. And it's just like a Docker volume. And then it's basically treating that the same way it does when it's a standalone. So BuildKit itself is importing container D libraries and using the container D storage mechanism. And so if you look here, you would end up seeing something pretty similar to what you'd see for like a container D image store. But then if you want to load that into Docker, you have to provide an extra flag when you're using this driver. And so then what happens, is behind the scenes, it's basically just loading it into this storage here with all the problems we talked about. Yeah.
You mentioned that there's an extra flag you have to pass to get it to load into Docker. Does that mean that after this release of Docker, if you don't run docker build -- something, you don't see your image in Docker images?
So that flag is only needed for this Docker container driver, which is not the default. You have to run a command to specifically enable this one. This other driver will be the default. Again, take this with a grain of salt because I'm not actually working on it. But and in that case, because Docker D is the actual storage mechanism behind all of it, you don't need the load flag. It's basically implied at that point.
So the Docker one is going to be the default one moving forward, not the Docker container one.
Right. And so, exactly. Like right now, it's not even doing any of this by default. It's doing like the old, Docker build mechanism without BuildKit. And so then, the switch is to deprecate that one. And then the order of preference becomes what you said, the Docker driver. And then you can enable this driver. There's also like a Kubernetes driver too, I think. But,
So does that mean when they switch over, there are going to be performance implications?
I think that generally the performance is at least as good or better. I know that there was an issue. There's like a couple like small changes. They're like really obscure things, printing to standard out or standard error instead of standard out. But like, I think the performance, there's not expected to be any sort of regression or anything like that. It's just either no difference or an improvement.
And so when we actually run a BuildKit front end with Docker right now, it can run in either of these modes. So like the front end can run with that BuildKit-ish model and store directly to Docker daemon, or it can also run with the other model where it spins BuildKit up as a container.
So when you're using a front end, that should work for either driver mode, essentially. Yeah, like the fact that this is using Docker D underneath the hood is completely hidden from like the front end that you would be running. The front end will have the exact same interface. And it's just that, when it stores its images, it's going to, be somewhat less efficient.
Did you say that the BuildKit-ish part, it does have support for merge op?
It will work and you'll get the same result at the end of all of it, but not with the same performance benefits. So like the lazy behavior that I was talking about before, that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for merge op. It doesn't work for the image references. You do get the same.
We can layer on top that fixes the daemon's data model.
Wait, sorry, what was that?
There's nothing BuildKit or build packs can layer on top that fixes the underlying constraints of the daemon's data model, right?
No, I mean, you can run the standalone BuildKit and then have your own total like interface that goes to that. But then at that point, if you do Docker image ls, then you will not, see what you're building there. Which sounds like that's what you care about. I don't know if there's Any other questions? I can answer them. I was just going to go and look at the doc and see if there's anything. Yeah, I guess there's a question about what kind of access you have on the client side to information like the image digest and the OCI manifest. So the image digest, so I guess this depends again, if you're talking directly to BuildKit, not through the Docker interface, then I know you can get the image digest. And actually, I think if you use Docker BuildX, you also can. There's like a flag with Docker BuildX to write the metadata of a build, and that will include the image digest. The OCI manifest, I think you would at least right now have to export as an OCI format, so locally. And so I guess at that point, yeah, obviously you can access the manifest because you just got the whole, tarball of the OCI layout.
So
yeah, I that's the only way I know of. Yeah.
So I can talk a bit about what I meant in that question. So
Sure.
Currently, BuildPacks produces, like, it can potentially produce an OCI layout image on disk.
Mhm.
Let's say what a lot of our users end up doing is that they don't realize that there's like some information lost when they use pack with daemon mode. So we'll build a perfect OCI image, and then when we'll call Docker load on it, some information lost right now. And then they do Docker push on that, which means that when Docker pushes that copy of the image that it has back to the registry, versus us directly pushing it to the registry rather than loading it to the daemon, ends up resulting in an image that's different or that's lossy.
Yeah.
So like some of the updates on that tweet said that now it had access to the OCI descriptors. I was just wondering, like, I was still not clear on whether, like, how embedded BuildKit is in Docker daemon. So whether you could access this information or it was stored somewhere in the daemon so that when you did Docker push, it would put that information back on the registry or not.
Yeah, none of the changes with merge op would have impacted that. So yeah, like I guess the connection with merge op is really that you can kind of think of it as a way of constructing like the layers list within there, because when you merge, you're just basically joining layers of each of the merge inputs together. But yeah, in general, like if Docker is dropping those annotations when you load it in, I mean, I'm not aware of that having changed. I obviously could have missed something. But yeah, otherwise it's kind of the same story as before, where if you using this driver and talking directly to BuildKit and telling BuildKit to go and export it, then those should be retained. But yeah, if it's dropped once to the import into Docker storage, then I'm not aware of that being any different.
Yeah, I think this was not directly related to the merge op update, but like along with the same release, it also included this note that it was now preserving like the OCI manifest. That's why I thought you might know something.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not totally sure off the top of my head. No.
Yeah. I think the other question I had with, like, we also had at some point an experimental BuildKit frontend for BuildPacks. So like a couple of questions just purely in terms of BuildKit, like does the source op allow you to take an OCI layout on some volume as an input? So like I see it takes in registries or other things as inputs, but is there some operation that lets you load it from an OCI layout on disk?
No, but there, like, just 2 days ago, I saw someone is starting to work on that actually. So there's definitely interest in that. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the time frame would be on it, but that, yeah, it's being worked on. Exactly that. So like, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, like you have the OCI layout on disk and you just want to kind of similar to like if you were to load, any other local files, but this time you want to load those local files, but then convert it into an image and be able to treat it like that. Yeah, that's totally possible. So it's, hopefully next version 0.11.
So the reason why I'm asking is because our experimental BuildKit frontend implementation had to re-implement our exporter. So our exporter currently exports either to the daemon or to the registry directly. And we were like, when we were doing the experiment, like we were told that if the exporter exported to an OCI layout, BuildKit, like they need to re-implement the whole exporter like in form of copy operations to reconstruct the image. They could just take the OCI layout and use like something equivalent to a source op, directly just convert that to an image.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess merge, it can replace like the chain of copies, which may have some benefits. But yeah, I guess I'm not sure if that would actually be that helpful here. I would need to look at exactly what's happening a little bit more.
Yeah, I can give you a link to our
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh yeah, sorry, I had to step away for a second, so I don't know if this question has been asked while I was absent. But I don't know how closely related the Docker file format and BuildKit is. Are merge ops going to be a thing in Docker files? Are you going to be able to say merge these three like run directives? That's the thing people always want to do, is like instead of run A and B and C, just like three different things and then merge them.
It right now that it's not directly exposed, so that copy link flag, that is essentially merge op. There's a little bit of a caveat there, but that's as close as it gets right now to a like direct merge op. In theory, though, you could add that, but yeah, that would be another release of Docker files. In general, there's no rule that like for every LLB operation there has to be a one-to-one correspondence with a Docker file, or anything like that. But the other operation I added, diff, is probably kind of useful for what you're describing there, because it lets you basically, you could run a command and then you can basically get the files that changed just as a result of the command without the base underneath it. And so you could like run three of those and then just take the changes created by those and merge them together. And so there's been some at least person who wanted that in Docker file. So like in theory you could add that, but yeah, it's like a case by case basis type of thing.
Is that so? It's maybe theoretically possible today with the correct usage of copy link directives, but is there a plan to make it any more high level than that?
There's not a plan. I mean, I honestly think it would just be like, if there's a use case for that, then we'd be totally open to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many blog posts about how you can get a smaller Docker image by cramming things into, instead of like apt-get install foo and then run apt cache cleanup or whatever, like put them in one run directive and you save a bunch of this one weird trick. I feel like that is a best practice that's been like cargo culted across 10 million Docker files, and it'd be great to just have it in the file format. But I don't know. I also don't know how much, like, I mean, you're working on BuildKit. I don't know how much of that is necessarily bubbled up to Docker files. Right.
Yeah, it in theory should. And yeah, I actually, once this blog post is out, you'll probably be interested in it, because I talk basically exactly about that, about finding a better way of doing exactly that, using merge op. And
exactly.
Yeah, I guess my main focus has been not so much Docker files, like just other formats that are being built on top of BuildKit. But yeah, in theory, it would be really nice. And obviously, Docker files still probably the most popular. That's my guess anyway. So yeah, it would be nice to figure out a way to expose, better alternatives to that. Yeah, it's just down to like if enough people request it and someone does it, then it can happen.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Did you send something about the OCI layout? I don't. Oh,
I sent you the current implementation of the front end, the experimental front end that we had.
cool. Yeah, I guess I would have to take a look at this and see exactly what's going on. In general, though, merge op is always going to be at least as efficient and usually more efficient than any chain of copy operations. So potentially helpful here.
I think the main place where you might want to look is the specific file. This is where most of the magic was implemented, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is really in response to being able to load the OCI layout as one thing so that we can continue to keep the exporter the exact same, but export an OCI layout and then use BuildKit to load that as the image so that we're just doing the container orchestration here and not having to re-implement like all the OCI image creation itself. Like we'll leave that in CNB.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes more sense. So yeah, basically just let BuildKit do that whole conversion for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being worked on. So hopefully next version.
So you talked about BuildKit being more like a server to client sort of communication, right? I'm assuming all that goes through a sort of socket right now. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, you can over a Unix socket or a network socket. Yep. It's a gRPC service basically.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess like one of the main benefits there is just that BuildKit has a lot of optimizations in terms of like, if you have two clients and they're doing, similar builds where there's overlap, then it can deduplicate those like live, or like, you take the cache of one and then use that with the other builds, like, so if you're like a really huge company with, hundreds of users, then those types of performance optimizations can making a pretty huge difference. Yeah.
So I think at least from our side, I don't think a lot has changed. I think our main blocker is still the Docker daemon, and
I think it does kind of give us a path. Like if we see more users start using the that other storage mechanism, the BuildKit direct driver, then it starts letting our end users get accustomed to loading images in for local development. So like I didn't really like carving that path, like as far as like Pack having to load images with like a manual command because users aren't used to it. But like if the mind share of using Docker and turning on this more efficient path to use like a container D backend for various reasons that, whatever, like I could see this, paving a way forward for us to not always incur that cost at least, right? And going directly to the, but it still may be transparent for us because if they change that driver, it doesn't really change much on our end maybe, but.
Yeah, and it's also the data loss, right? So like then the users could, if we do go down this other path, this different workflow where Pack itself is kind of managing the images and then able to load them into the daemon becomes sort of secondary, right? The Docker CLI becomes sort of secondary to a lot of that. And hopefully they're able to use other things like pushing them directly to a registry through Pack and that sort of stuff. And the daemon becomes more of a just not the primary, right, workflow.
So currently we interact with like the only thing that our base implementation lifecycle is aware of is like it can communicate with the daemon over a socket using the daemon API. Is there any information that is added to let us know like what kind of storage backend it's using? Like if like someone is running containerd, for example, as the storage backend, like would we know that by any chance through the API, or is that just like not exposed whatsoever?
Yeah, so it depends on which part you're talking about. So with the Docker daemon, I mean, it only has, as far as I know, one storage backend. Like the containerd backend, that doesn't exist. That's like hypothetical for Docker specifically. So I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But I like with BuildKit, I know you can go and ask it. Like it has multiple backends, and you ask it which one it's using. And I know that with Docker, so like if you're using Docker build X, you can choose, which driver backend you're using, like these various different options. And there, I know with the CLI, you can ask it which driver is being used and change that and all of that. So I would assume it must be possible with an API, hopefully. But yeah, not 100% sure. No.
It seems like at the very least, there's interesting prior art here. It's like if we didn't want to export to the daemon, like could we do something similar to what's being done by BuildKit now to get better performance? And then to me, the big question mark comes down to like how important other OCI artifacts are going to be to some of our core workflows. Because I don't think, containerd storage, I think containerd storage is about containers, right? It's not about arbitrary artifacts in the way the OCI spec is trending.
Yeah, I don't know very much about that at all, but I'm not aware of, I know for BuildKit, there's no way to just like say, attach this arbitrary artifact. Like in theory, like I can't imagine why it would be technically impossible to implement that someday, but obviously that's very hypothetical and want to figure that out. But I mean, another option is to use BuildKit to push images, and then you can do some registry operations after that too.
I have a question about this diagram. It just came to mind. It's something we've talked about before. I know this is a very simplified diagram, but in the case of using the Docker container driver, if I were to, do a Docker file that says from some image name, does the BuildKit container ever check Docker storage to pull images that already exist in the daemon? Or does it always only look at its own or a registry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Because that's what we struggled with, because we kind of designed something similar for like Pack having its own storage volume and storing all this stuff OCI layout on disk. But then it gets a little weird when you're like asking Pack to build something that might come from a local image. And if you didn't have it loaded, like, and it happens to be a public registry image, it's going to pull it. And is that okay? Is that expected? And that user behavior is, confusing.
Yeah. No, I honestly just don't know. I guess I would just say I'd be a little surprised, because then BuildKit would have to have a dependency on the Docker API to go and look into its storage. And I don't think it does, but you never know. Unfortunately, I don't know that. My interaction with the Docker daemon has been very limited, just to a couple of connection points.
Gotcha. But for the prior art, that makes sense. Like to Emily's point, like if the prior art is that this is the way like Docker container works with like BuildX, then Pack works in a similar way. At least we can like use that as a prior art and like, when we're designing it out.
Yeah. I think there's definitely other projects that are going in somewhat similar directions. Like I know Dagger, that's like a new thing from former founders of Docker. They will use Docker if nothing else is there, but they literally just start up BuildKit in a container, not even using this driver mechanism. They just literally start it up and then can talk to it directly for, I think, incredibly similar reasons to you, where it's like Docker is great because everyone has it, but it's not great because of all these storage problems. So you can just start BuildKit in it. Yeah.
It's great that other people are going that direction, because I think one of our big sticking points has been like trying to swim upstream against expectations on the user's behalf. Like, we're not a big enough project to like universally reset expectations ourselves. So if we're the first project that's like, oh, your base image, you can't just get that from the daemon storage, people can be like, what is BuildPacks even doing over there, right? But if multiple projects are going that direction, then it's helpful.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I would just also add that it wouldn't hurt to talk to like someone from Docker too, like she works there and has more insight, just to make sure that they're not like secretly going to fix all of these, or something like that. Yeah, I would just add that,
Could you introduce us to someone who'd be willing to help us out?
Yeah, Tonus, he's like the main BuildKit maintainer. He would be, the perfect person. That's who I would go and ask. So yeah, I mean, you saw him on Twitter. He's also in there's like a BuildKit Slack where he's always answering everyone's questions and stuff too. So, but yeah.
I think I'd be super interested in another one of these very often with more folks doing this kind of stuff. I feel like we're all approaching the same problem from 8 different angles, and necessary. Some of that is like necessary complexity, and some of that is just completely avoidable extra work. So
sort of like container builders guild.
yeah. We can get robes. We can all wear hooded robes. It'll be lovely.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah.
Sorry. I was just saying, I was also curious how Go handles this, because it has to deal with a similar problem about loading. Like it has a local mode, right?
Code just does the dumb thing, and Docker loads a tarball. I mean, I think we don't care if it's slow because we prefer you to push to the registry. I completely understand why Pack would want to optimize that, but I think Code's answer has just been YOLO. It's slow because you want to use Docker. It's your fault.
Also, in the Go situation, you're using like the distroless base image, and you got maybe like one layer or something. Like it's such a simple image that
it's
the performance looks really different than when you're like, loading a JVM app and all that stuff.
Yeah, just don't load the JVM. It'll be great.
Native images are coming, so people are using it already.
Anyway, this has been great. We should do this again, all of us sometime, because I think this is really helpful.
Thanks for setting it up. Thank you, Eric, for the topic.
Thanks so much for answering our bajillion questions.
Oh yeah, totally. No, I'm happy to whenever. It's really enjoyable. Yeah, I guess I've only been involved with all of this for about a little over like a year and a half, and so now it's nice to talk to people outside the BuildKit bubble now too.
And I gotta run. Good one, everybody.
See you, folks.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.